Hello everyone. Today we're going to be covering the next three skills in negative numbers, multiplication, and division. First, we're going to talk about negative signs in fractions with variables. Then we're going to review multiplying positive and negative fractions. And lastly, we're going to go over dividing positive and negative fractions. So starting with negative signs and fractions with variables. If you can recall from the last lesson, we learned that trick that if you have an even number of negatives, your answer should be positive. And if you have an odd number of negatives, your answer should be negative. So let's take a look at one of these. It says, which of the following expressions are equivalent to negative A over B? Well, I have two negatives here. So I have an even number of negatives, which means that my answer is going to be a positive. So looking at answer choice A, I have one negative, which means it's going to be a negative. Answer choice B, I have two negatives, which makes it a positive. So that would be the correct answer. Let's try another one. Which of the following expressions are equivalent to -7 over negative f? Again, we have two negatives, which is an even number. That makes our answer a positive. I can see answer choice A has three negatives, which means it's going to be a negative. Answer choice B has one negative, which makes it a negative. So in this case, the answer would be C, none of the above. Here, which of the following expressions are equivalent to -J over -K? I have two negatives, which makes it a positive. And I can see in both answer choices A and B, both of those have two negatives, which means that both of those would be correct answers. And notice it does say choose all answers that apply. Let's try one more. Which expression is equivalent to the following complex fraction? Well, here I can see I've got a fraction up top, and that's being divided by an integer. So I'm just going to rewrite it the way you're used to seeing it. That would be 7 over -3 divided by -2, which we should know by now if we have a whole number, we can always put that over 1, or we can just leave it as -2. So if you take a look at answer choice A, I can see right away that it's incorrect because they did your keep, change, flip step. But remember, when you do keep, change, flip, your division should be multiplication. And here they did not change that. So that would not be correct. If you look at answer choice B, it looks just like mine, except I put -2 over 1. So answer choice B would be the correct answer here. And this is what we call a complex fraction. It's basically just a fraction division problem. Okay, let's move into multiplying positive and negative fractions. Your same rules are going to apply, and that's that tic-tac-toe trick that we talked about. Pluses on the diagonal and minus signs everywhere else, or negative signs. So let's take a look at the first one. First few problems. We're just going to multiply like we normally would. But what I would suggest doing is determine what your sign is going to be before you actually multiply your fraction. So I can see here, I have a negative times a negative, which means my answer is going to be a positive. So now that I know that, I can just go ahead and multiply the fractions like we normally would. First, I'm going to check my diagonals to see if I can cross simplify, which I can't. So that means we're just going to multiply our numbers. 2 times 4 is 8, and 5 times 7 is 35. Last step, always check to see if you can simplify, which 8 over 35 I cannot. So that's my final answer. Let's take a look at the next one. We have a negative times a positive. Let me put the tic-tac-toe up here in the corner so you have it there. So I've got a negative times a positive. So I'm going to go here, negative times a positive, which means my answer should be a negative. And as you can see, I can actually cross simplify on both diagonals. Let's start with 2 and 8. They're both divisible by 2, which makes that a 1 and a 4. And then we can also cross simplify with 3 and 9. They're both divisible by 3, which makes that a 1 and a 3. I know my answer is going to be a negative. 1 times 1 is 1, and 3 times 4 is 12. So your final answer here would be negative 112. Now notice this bottom one, you're multiplying 3 different numbers. We have 2 fractions and then a whole number. So I'm going to just put 2 over 1. And then I've got 1 negative, which is an odd number of negatives, which means our answer is going to stay negative. And then the last thing you want to do is to see if you can cross simplify anywhere. Now, looking here, I can't cross simplify with 3 and 16, but I can cross simplify with the 2 and the 16. Even though they're separated by this fraction in the middle, since one is on the top and since the 2 is on the top and the 16 is on the bottom, I can still cross simplify them. So 2 and 16 are both divisible by 2. So this becomes a 1, and 16 divided by 2, that becomes an 8. And now I'm just going to multiply my top numbers. 1 times 3 is 3. 3 times 1 is 3. And then I've got 1 times 4, which is 4. And then 4 times 8, which is 32. Checking, can I simplify 3 over 32? I can't. So my final answer there is negative 3 over 32. Let's try a few more of these. Here we have a negative times a negative, which means my answer is going to be a positive. Looking at my diagonals, I can't cross simplify with 5 and 7, but I can cross simplify with 4 and 6. They're both divisible by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. That leaves me with 3 times 5, which is 15, and 7 times 2, which is 14. You can leave your answers as simplified improper fractions, so that's our final answer. Okay, the next one, I've got a negative times a positive, which means my answer is a negative. Checking my diagonals, 3 and 8, I can't cross simplify there. And then 3 and 7, I can't cross simplify there. So we're just going to multiply our numerators. 3 times 3 is 9. 7 times 8 is 56. And I can't simplify that fraction any further. So I'm just going to write my fraction as my answer, negative 9 over 56. Let's move on to some dividing positive and negative fractions. Again, we're just going to use the same tic-tac-toe trick that we've been using. So moving on to the first problem. I've got a negative divided by a positive, which gives me a negative. And then what you need to remember with your fractions is you always have to do your keep, change, flip step. So I'm going to keep my first fraction. I'm not even going to bother to keep the negative because I already know my answer is a negative. I'm going to change my division sign to multiplication, and then I'm going to flip my last fraction. Because when we divide fractions, we have to multiply by the reciprocal. Now I'm going to check my diagonals to see if I can cross simplify, and I can see that I can't. They share no common factors. So we're just going to multiply our numerators and our denominators. My answer is a negative. 7 times 8 is 56. And 9 times 9 is 81. So your final answer would be negative 56 over 81. Let's try another one. Here I've got a negative divided by a negative, which gives me a positive. We're going to do our keep, change, flip step. So I'm going to keep 4/5. I'm going to change division to multiplication, and I'm going to flip my second fraction. Again, I did not bring the negatives because I already know my answer is going to be a positive. Check your diagonals to see if you can cross simplify, which we can't. So I'm just going to multiply across. 4 times 6 is 24, and 5 times 7 is 35. Now looking at 24 and 35, I cannot cross simplify that any further. So my final answer would be 24 over 35, and it's a positive. Let's try one last one. I've got a positive divided by a negative, which means my answer is a negative. Next, we're going to do keep, change, flip. So I'm going to keep my first fraction, change my division, and flip my second fraction. Here I can see that I can cross simplify with 2 and 4. They're both divisible by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. I know my answer is a negative. 2 times 9 gives me 18, and 5 times 1 is 5. One of the most important things to remember is that you cannot cross simplify until you do that keep, change, flip step. It has to be a multiplication problem in order for you to cross simplify. So my final answer is negative 18 over 5. That does it for those 3 skills. The correlating note-taking packet pages are pages 9 through 12. And again, if you'd like to see some additional examples, you can watch the videos on Khan Academy. Have a great day, everyone.